Hello, boys and girls. I'm Mrs. Kerbach, and I'm going to read to you Chapter 10 of the book Bearwalker. This chapter is called Stuck. The road is totally blocked. Unless we want to walk, we're stuck at Camp Chuckamuck. We're gathered after dinner around a big fireplace in the main building. Almost all of us are here except Mr. Osgood. Just about everyone is acting like all of this is no big deal. But I don't think so. This is a big deal. That explosion didn't just block the road, it also took out the phone lines, which ran between the hills that collapsed when the dynamite went off. The only reason we still have electricity is because the power company strung their lines over the hill rather than through that gap. Po' Boy bumps his wide, flat head against my arm. He looks up at me with his big, sympathetic Labrador eyes. It's like he's trying to tell me something. I reach out and rub his head and neck, and his tail thumps on the floor in response. Before he left, Mr. Osgood told him to stay, even though he whimpered and struggled so much to follow him at first that he had to be shut in the kitchen. It was like he knew it wasn't safe for his master to go off like that on his own. It was only after Mr. Osgood had been gone for half an hour that he stopped scratching at the door that Mrs. Osgood finally let him out. The explosion had surprised just about everyone except the Philos, who knew what it was right away. "That was your dynamite, dear," Mrs. Philo had said in an admonitory voice to her husband, while the blast was still echoing over the lake and people were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Mr. Philo's dynamite, as his wife kept calling it, was indeed what caused the explosion. That shack with the keep out and stay away warnings painted on its side had been built by a professional contractor to store the explosives that were supposed to have been used to widen that narrow gap between the rocky hills. Mr. Philo's heart attack a year ago had stopped that construction project, though. What surprised the Philos was that the dynamite was still there. It was supposed to have been removed because dynamite can become unstable if it isn't stored properly. "We'll be having a word with that contractor," Mr. Philo said to the crowd of campers gathered in the main building, who had become an appreciative audience for him and his wife. "More likely a couple of words we won't repeat in polite company," Mrs. Philo added. Just about everyone laughed. I didn't. I was worrying about too many things. The dynamite shed was so close to that gap in the hills that when it blew, it brought down tons and tons of stone, as well as the trees that were growing up higher. Halfway through the gap, the road just ended in a 20-foot tall wall of stone and earth, topped with toppled cedars. On either side of those hills, the land rose into mountains. There was a walking trail that swung around the now closed gap and rejoined the road, but even an off-trail vehicle wouldn't be able to negotiate that. The only way around the landslide was on foot. Other trails, of course, led out of Camp Chuckamuck. They were all hiking paths or old overgrown logging roads that snowmobilers used in the winter months. You couldn't get a car or truck down any of them. And the shortest of those trails was 20 miles around the mountain with 2 rivers to cross before reaching the nearest town. No one was supposed to be coming into Chuckamuck until our bus driver returned to pick us up, but that was not scheduled for another 3 days. We were stuck until then unless someone did something. "Well," Mr. Osgood had said when the road situation had been explained to everyone, "I appear to have been elected." As the camp caretaker, he saw it as his job to go out and make contact with those who could bring in earth-moving equipment and open the road again. With dozers and a backhoe, it would take no more than a day or 2. The idea of a long walk didn't bother him at all. 10 miles is not but a random scoot," he said, "but I do not expect to have to hoof it that far." He reached into the pocket of his green wool jacket and pulled out a spark plug. "I'll just pop this into Matilda and ride in style." Matilda was Mr. Osgood's all-terrain vehicle, a 4-wheeler that he kept parked under a tarp a mile down the road past the now vaporized explosives shed. Keeping Matilda spark plugless was his way of ensuring no one else took her for a joyride. His wife handed him the backpack that he called his old kit bag. It contained a thermos, a sandwich, and a flashlight. "All I need aside from Betsy," he said, tapping the stock of the old single-shot .22 rifle that was slung over his left shoulder. I wish I could have stopped him, but what could I have said or done? What did I know besides the fact that I had awful feelings of impending doom? And what can I say now as everyone sits here after dinner, relaxed and listening to Mr. and Mrs. Philo tell their stories? Even Asa and his crew are enjoying it so much that they seem to have completely forgotten about making my life miserable, as if. Mr. Wilbur looks over at me, nods, and gives me a big thumbs up. He's noticed that Tara is sitting right next to me here in the corner on the floor. Somehow she seems to have adopted me as her little pet. She even keeps nudging me now and then, peering over my shoulder to see what I'm writing in my notebook. But I cover it with my hand whenever she does that. Aren't the Philos just the sweetest? She whispers in my ear. Are you writing down their stories? Just writing, I whisper back. I have to say something. For whatever reason, pity maybe, she's being nice to me, and it does feel good to have her leaning against me like this. I straighten my shoulders. I have to think. I have to keep my eyes and ears open. Everybody else believes that it's all under control here, that the road being blocked is the worst that can happen. I just know it isn't. I look up to scan the room. I've chosen this place in the corner not because it's close to the front, where Mr. and Mrs. Philo have now moved from talking about the history of Chuckamuck to telling Adirondack tall tales. I've chosen it because from here I can see the whole room. I can see who is here and also who is not here. And it is the thought of that one who is not here, the one I haven't seen since shortly after the explosion went off, that fills me with dread. Where is he? That is one of the two questions that keeps running through my head. The other is, why am I the only one who is worried? For a while before the Philos got here, it seemed as if Mr. Wilbur shared my uncertainty. But when Mr. and Mrs. Philo arrived, he got all relaxed. In fact, he now seems as happy as a clam in its shell. Even though they are just two frail old people, Mr. Wilbur seems to think their being here will make everything turn out right. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I sat at the same table where he and the Philos were talking during dinner and got the picture that they were like family to him. When he was my age, he'd come to Camp Chuckamuck as a scared, self-conscious eighth grader, and whatever they had done had given him self-confidence and courage. Being back in their presence made him feel like that little boy again, being protected by the two people he trusted more than any others. I appreciated that, even though she was old, but not as old as Mrs. Philo. Grandma Kateri sort of does that for me when I am around her. When you know that someone loves you and has faith in you, it changes things. It doesn't take away the pain of losing people you love or make you grow 2 feet taller overnight, but it does make you feel less alone. However, it ought not to make you feel so secure that you lose sight of what is happening around you. Mr. Wilbur was the one who said that something wasn't right with these people who came to replace the Philos as the camp staff. Wasn't he the one who was trying to convince Mrs. Smiler how incompetent they seemed? Didn't he seem to think that the one they called Walker White Bear seemed really strange? He was the one who said how much money the camp property was worth if it sold. Didn't he hear the Philos say that they came here because he invited them? Except he didn't. So who did? He seems to have forgotten about that mystery. And what about the road being closed by that supposedly accidental dynamite blast that also cut the phone lines? I've been asking myself those questions nonstop for the last few hours, and gradually it has all come together like the pieces of a puzzle. Can't Mr. Wilbur put two and two together? It all makes sense to me, too much sense. I look at my journal where I've written it all down. It adds up to even more than four. It adds up to the fact that we are all in terrible danger and that we are trapped. I've been trying to get Mr. Wilbur alone to talk to him since before the Philos arrived. I stare hard at him, trying to get his attention. It doesn't work. He's sitting up front, his eyes on Mr. and Mrs. Philo, a little smile on his lips, totally engrossed in their stories. So is Mrs. Smiler and the three parent chaperones who seated themselves around the back of the room to keep an eye on any potentially restless students. But the only restless student is me. Where is he? What is he planning to do? Where's who? Tara whispers to me, and I realize that I've been talking aloud to myself, fortunately in a mumble, but loud enough for her to hear. She's trying to look again at what I've been writing in my secret journal. Nobody, I whispered back, a little too loudly. A few heads turn in our direction, but then are drawn just as quickly back to the front where Mr. Philo is talking about the really cold winter they once had here at Camp Chuckamuck. It was so cold, he says with a straight face, that we tried to talk while we were outside. Our words froze in a cloud around our mouths. We had to pry those frozen words off, lug them back in, and thaw them out on the stove. That was the only way, Mrs. Philo chirps, right on cue, that we could carry on a conversation. People started laughing, but Tara isn't giving up. Who are you talking about? She insists, poking me in my shoulder again. A part of me notices that she is just doing that about the same way Mrs. Philo is now jabbing her finger at her husband up front. Tell me, or you are in big trouble, Buster, Tara says, shaking a fist in front of my face in a mock threat. I close my journal and slip it into the deep front pocket of my shirt. I shouldn't answer her, but her good-natured teasing unnerves me. I'm not used to a girl paying attention to me, especially one I have always secretly liked. The next thing I know, I hear myself answering her question. The one they call Walker White Bear, I say quietly. Oh, Tara whispers back, him. Didn't you hear them say that since Mr. Osgood was gone, Mr. Whitebear was the one in charge of splitting the wood and then keeping the big campfire going in the woods till it's time for us to gather there? That's where he is now. He's probably sitting out there in the woods by the fire now, waiting for us to finish in here and then come outside. I should have figured it out. Despite the road being closed and the phones being out, we are going to go right back to our original schedule, which includes a walk through the dark woods to the primitive gathering area and storytelling around the campfire. Tara hugs herself and rocks back a little. This is all so exciting, isn't it, Baron? I don't answer her this time. I feel as if there is a big, cold stone in my stomach. He's waiting outside for us, and like foolish rabbits hopping into a mountain lion's den, we are all about to go out there to him.